The businessman. The rays of sunlight sailed their way into the city. The blanket of clouds cast its enormous shadows below. The shining Chicago buildings reflected the gray sky above, creating a skyline of mirrors. The average city day filled with noise. Commuters were on their way to work. Cars were battling their way through the traffic. Hot dog stands piled up in street corners, and the smell wavered in the air. The man perched on top of the office building lay still. He was in a prone position. Sweat was dripping down his forehead. He was lying on his stomach on the corner of the roof. Watchful eyes focused on the building opposite across the street. They had a gleam like an innocent teenager, but his face had a look of a hardened criminal. He knew that in a few minutes a rich businessman would appear on the 25th floor of the opposite building. The entire building was coated with bulletproof glass, but the man had secretly carved out a tiny, barely noticeable hole in the glass the night before. The hole was angled so that he could shoot the bullet through it, making it land directly in the chair that the businessman was about to sit in. The businessman was not a good man. He was more than not good. The man was a drug dealer. He was responsible for exporting cocaine on a massive scale. The sniper knew the man's real name, but never used it. Whenever he referred to him mentally, the sniper simply called him the businessman. This was to ensure he didn't get personal with his target. It could cause hesitation. The sniper moved his hand along the smooth surface of his rifle as he prepared for the kill. It was sleek and custom made. The biggest advantage was its compatibility. With just two screws, he was able to put the rifle together. He had been able to carry it in a large backpack all across the city. He centered his eyes against the scope. He adjusted the crosshairs on the hole in the glass. He loaded a single cartridge into the rifle. One shot was all he needed. The businessman arrived on time as predicted. The plump man was wearing a top of the line black suit with a thick cigarette in his hand. He was accompanied with half a dozen bodyguards. And in front of him were three other rich businessmen and one woman. They were sitting in front of a poker table made of a wood that was now extinct. However, to the sniper's surprise, the businessman had been interrupted with a phone call. This caused some panic. Had he just been informed he had an important mission to attend? People like him were always busy, or perhaps he had cancelled the game. How long was he going to talk? The sniper needed him seated perfectly at the chair, otherwise, he was always behind bulletproof glass. This was trouble. The sniper was horribly exposed. There were crowds of pedestrians down below. Over a dozen police officers were on duty. Someone simply needed to squint their eyes up the wrecked building, and they would be able to see a hooded figure with a rifle protruding out. There would be a full alarm, and there would be no escape from that. Or suppose someone in the building decided to climb onto the roof to take a breath. of fresh air. Smokers frequently came up to take a drag. He would be spotted. The person would quickly call for help. The police would be waiting for him at the base of the building. There was no lock on the rusty roof door. It was risk he was going to have to take. Suddenly, he started to question himself if this was actually a good idea. Perhaps it would be better if he fled now before getting caught. The sum of money he was paid for this task was a considerable amount, but he could easily earn double of that in another mission. No patience, he tried to tell himself. A large organization had hired him to complete this task. They would not accept failure. He wiped the bead of sweat off his forehead and readjusted his grip. After what seemed like an eternity, the businessman ended his call and made his way to the table. This was the sniper's chance. He forced himself not to get too excited. His wide eyes were eagerly glaring through his scope. His finger was twitching as he placed it on the trigger. He studied his breath. His rifle and him were one. At that moment, everything was irrelevant. The people on the streets, the birds in the sky, even the $50,000 he was paid to complete this task. He controlled everything at the moment. He could make the decision between life and death. The sniper was God. The businessman seated himself comfortably at the head of the table. The sniper fired. The bullet pierced through the air. It soared through the hole in the glass before burying itself in the businessman's heart. The businessman suddenly dropped his cards. He froze as if surprised. He put a hand to his chest and slumped down. His head slammed against the table before he doubled over. One arm was on the bullet wound, the other outstretched. His face frozen, his eyes pumped out as a pool of red began to spread. It took the people in the room a while to take in what just happened. Seconds later, the bodyguards reacted. They turned around, scanning the opposite buildings for the shooter, but the sniper was nowhere to be seen. As soon as he had fired, he began to pack away his things. Within seconds, he dismantled his rifle, packed it neatly in his bag, and exited through the roof door. The people in the streets had heard the shot fired. There was an immediate panic. The people were screaming. Half of a dozen people, officers, drew out their guns, while another half dozen were desperately trying to keep everyone calm. This provided the sniper the perfect cover. He put on his hoodie, exited the office building, and joined the chaos. The sniper didn't stop to watch his breath until half an hour later. He was in a telephone booth. The street was deserted. He could hear the faint sound of an ambulance. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a crumpled piece of paper with the phone number scribbled on it. He was told to call the number at the specific address when the job was done. He punched in the numbers, then waited. The call was answered with a cool female voice. "It's done," he said coldly. "I'll expect my payment in the casual manner." There was a long pause. Then there was no answer. The receiver went blank. Confused, the sniper called out for response. But there was none. There was a flash, followed by a deafening roar. The trash can beside him had exploded. The shrapnel pierced through the glass in the telephone booth. It sliced into the sniper's flesh. The force sent everything flying in all directions. The sniper was thrown off his feet. Suddenly, the street was littered with shards of glass, pieces of plastic, and bits of human tissue. The sniper was no more.